Hi, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of The Yard Sign. Your host, as always, Johnny Torres. Thank you so much for watching. I'm excited because of the guest that I have with me today, but certainly we are going to be discussing a very serious topic as it continues to develop halfway around the world. But again, this is the opportunity where you want to hear from people who've had experience in those parts of the world and those who have been there and given that firsthand experience and been on the ground in those situations and have a much different perspective maybe than you and I would have in regards to what's happening in Afghanistan. So that is going to be today's topic for this special edition of the Yard Sign. Let's go ahead over to the big table and welcome today's guests. We've got a familiar face on the far end, my buddy Joe Wicker. Who's a veteran.
Which camera am I looking at?
That one here over here on the far left. There we go.
Got it.
I mean, you've mentioned on the show before, but you are an Army veteran. Do you want to kind of mention some of the engagements you were involved in?
Well, I think for the purposes of this show, I was an assistant team chief on an advisory team that worked with the Iraqi security forces in Baghdad during the surge. So the mission there was to advise and train them to take over the security of their own country.
Okay. Well, and again, obviously...
So that was the mission that we did. That's also the mission that we've been doing in Afghanistan for basically 20 years.
Exactly.
Too,
and that was what I was going to say.
Which unfortunately hasn't unfolded well. Yeah.
Relative to the conversation that we're going to be having today. And new to the show, but not new to me, a good friend of mine from when I was at Senator Rubio's office, a former state representative, former county commissioner in Citrus County, Jimmie Todd Smith. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good.
Thanks so much for being here. This is awesome. I'm so excited to have you.
Well, look, I've enjoyed watching the show, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, well, and again, you've taken on a new role now, and again, where you've kind of continued to serve the community in so many different ways, both in Tallahassee, in the county commission in Citrus County, and now you've taken on a role with Concerned Veterans of America. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm the Florida Coalition's director for the Concerned Veterans for America. We're a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that works on policy. So we're known as the voice for veterans for freedom and prosperity. So being the voice of veterans for freedom and prosperity means that we're not a VSO. We don't take on veterans cases like the VFW and stuff like that. We actually work on policy that we bring to state and federal leaders that benefit the nation as a whole. So if it benefits veterans in this way, potentially it benefits the entire nation.
Yeah. So again, this may be the biggest issue affecting our veterans, maybe since a lot of the issues that we've had with the VA in recent years. And we may touch on some of that, but that's not really the point of today's conversation. What I think most Americans are certainly concerned with, and we've seen it all across social media, has been the concern over veterans' mental health in regards to what has just transpired. So let's talk a little bit about that before we kind of get into some of the political stuff and military kind of nuances about what's happening. What are you hearing so far in regards to the reaction from veterans who both served in Afghanistan and maybe those who have been affected by it regardless?
So obviously, yes, I've communicated with a lot of veterans, people that I know personally that I mentored before they went into the military, people that I know who are currently serving that are still in the military. So I've got a pretty broad brush of individuals to communicate with. And what I'm hearing as far as the mental health and the stress is that they're really challenged by feeling that some of their service over there was for naught. And the first and foremost, people are saying, listen, no matter what the people in suits do, we love the people in boots.
Yeah.
And we know that you served your country with pride. Think about that. The men and women went over there and were told to go into battle and to do X and Y, and they did. And they did it with courage. And even though they lost brothers and sisters over there in battle, at no point should any veteran feel anything less than pride for standing up as a brave member of the United States military doing the duty that they were tasked to do. And that's the conversations that we're currently having. But they feel that maybe we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Then there's the feeling on the far side that says, well, maybe we should have never left and maybe had more troops there. Neither one of them is the right answer. Neither one is. Basically, the reality is, the right answer is we went over there for the right reason. Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. And then the other side is, it was the time to leave. 20 years or more enough. When you are sending the children of the first warfighters into the same war, it's more than time to leave.
Yeah, well, and we're going to get into some of the timing, and then of course the execution of our departure, from Afghanistan. But as a good podcast host, we had a little conversation before the show where we discussed how right off the bat people were making comparisons to Vietnam, and we discussed that a little bit in the sense that there was a very vocal anti-war movement in the 70s that not only rejected the war for it being what it is, but also lumped in a lot of the soldiers that were involved in that war and held them responsible for the things that happened in that war. So nowadays, while I would say maybe the majority of the country could maybe consider themselves anti-war, as you said, they are very supportive of our troops. And then there's some conflict as to how and what we should have done in Afghanistan. For those veterans who did serve in Vietnam, if you've had the chance to talk to some of them, I mean, how are they feeling about this? Is this deja vu for them, or do they understand, some of the nuances and the differences between where we were culturally in the 70s versus now?
Well, and I think, and it really was exemplified by the picture of the helicopter on the embassy. That's when it really kind of triggered some of my friends who are Vietnam veterans, who are saying, well, look, it is Vietnam all over again. But they also understand that they learned in Vietnam it was eventually time to leave, that it was a war that was unwinnable. And so they understand that. And so both entities, the current Afghan veterans as well as the Vietnam veterans, uniformly believe that the service was the right service and honorable. But it is to where everybody's looking to DC and to the generals and suggesting, okay, you guys put us in this situation. This is all laid on the feet of politicians and generals, especially now that they're Monday morning quarterbacking about how to do everything, that none of them won the war. There's nobody in all of DC and all of the Pentagon that can raise their hand and say, I won the war.
Right.
And Vietnam veterans get that because in Vietnam, they won the battles, but not one general or one politician coming out of Vietnam was able to say, I won the war.
So are they also, seeing some emotional effects from this? I mean, because again, certainly generationally, they had to suppress a lot of those feelings, a lot of that maybe remorse, regret, rejection that they felt when they came back home. Emotionally, where do you see some of those Vietnam vets when they look at what just happened in Afghanistan?
Absolutely in the same position. Absolutely in the same position. I talked to certain Vietnam veterans who are very vocal in the same way that some of the Afghan vets are about, was the service of our men and women fighting over there worth it? So the ones who did serve are saying, was our service. And the ones who are Vietnam veterans are saying, was their service. But other than that specific aspect, it is correlating with each other. They're very much aligned. So
for an organization like yourself, like CVA, so Concerned Veterans of America, what's really been, right out of the gate, what has your message been first to veterans?
Well, first to veterans, obviously, is the message of no matter what happens, okay, we can do an after actions after all of this and blame whomever. Right now, your service mattered. If you need help, there's the VA hotline and other hotlines within your community. Call them. So that's our first message to individuals. The second thing is, no matter what is happening in Afghanistan right now, the withdrawal out of Afghanistan was needed. There was absolutely no benefit to staying in Afghan long term. And then there's lots of talking heads that will suggest that there was.
Sure.
But then you have the State Department's very own report from 2019. They've yet to come out with 2020. But their own reports demonstrate that terrorism was growing on the continent of Africa. So if it's growing on the continent of Africa, having billions of dollars every year spent in a country that is basically, controlled by the Taliban and was growing and controlled by the Taliban was not a benefit to us. Because the Taliban, even though they supported Al-Qaeda, they never attacked us.
Right.
We went in there and said, well, you give us Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden or else. They said, well, we'll take or else. And subsequently we went in.
Hi, everybody. Again, welcome to the Yard Sign, this special edition where we're discussing developments in Afghanistan. And I brought in two friends of mine who, again, have varying expertise, experience, not only in that part of the world, but certainly with dealing with a lot of the different elements that not only led to what's currently happening in Afghanistan, but are now certainly being affected by the fallout of Afghanistan or our departure from there. So again, joining me in today's conversation, Joe Wicker and Jimmie T. Smith, former state representative, former county commissioner in Citrus County, and currently the coalitions director for Concerned Veterans of America. I now kind of want to shift the conversation to, let's say, not so much the political, right? Because of course we briefly touched on the generals and the intelligence agencies and all these who really have been responsible for what's been going on there the past 20 years. Let's get into that. First of all, from a military perspective, for whether you're serving or you have served, how does that dynamic change, or what effect does this have for, again, not only those serving but those who are veterans in regards to that relationship between those higher ups, within the military ranks, and then of course the collaboration with the intelligence agencies when you see a failure like we are witnessing in Afghanistan?
Well, and I think it can actually be demonstrated by the Panama paper, or not Panama, the Afghan papers that came out in 2010, 2011. And matter of fact, there's a book on it that's recently been concluded and will be coming out shortly as well. And fundamentally, and this was the troops on the ground, people I know have told me, they knew things were not working out. I mean, there was Operation Anaconda, which was an effective operation, and some other things. But overall, the Afghan papers had emails from generals and others and diplomats that basically said, we don't know what to do. We don't understand the Afghanis, and we really don't understand what to do. And there was hundreds of suggestions that came out of that. Mm-hmm. But yet still, I think we can see by today's current situation, nobody really understood how to handle Afghanistan. And I think the reality is Alexander the Great didn't understand how to operate with them.
Wow, yeah.
Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, the British Empire, the Russians, and us. Nobody understands.
Well, I'm not suggesting that I have an answer for that, but I do think that there is a problem that's derived from our culture that causes us to not take certain actions in the Middle East. And what I mean by that is, in American culture is turn the other cheek, right? Their culture is eye for an eye.
Yes.
Okay. Religiously speaking, they're Old Testament, we're kind of New Testament, right? Our belief system is that in our culture, if you screw up and you acknowledge that you made a mistake, that actually builds trust. And we think, gosh, this guy understands his, where he failed. This will make him better moving forward. You actually build trust working with people like that. In the Middle East, they will not bring themselves to acknowledge that they've personally made an error, because then this is somehow dishonorable, and so it's an honor issue, right? So they will lie and cover up things when that doesn't help.
Much like the Asian culture.
Yes, it's an honor thing, and so you have a problem moving forward and getting better when you can't do that, when you can't make that self-assessment.
But like you're demonstrating, people on the ground understood that. People on the ground who were actually interacting.
Yeah, you learn it. Oh, you learn.
Right.
You learn because you're dealing with them on a daily basis.
If you follow what was put out in the Afghan papers, the generals weren't learning that. So there, like back to his question, there was, I believe, is demonstrated a huge disconnect of what was smart and knowledgeable and capable on the ground compared to the plannings and the strategies and things. So tactics and techniques is different than strategies.
Yes.
And fundamentally, the two could not connect. And that, I think, was something that when I talk to Afghan veterans, they will tell you, they knew how to fight the enemy. They knew how to deal with the enemy.
Of course.
Okay? But then you have the demonstrations of the Afghan papers that says the generals had no clue. And this is their words. This is literally their words back to D.C. and back to the Pentagon, to where they demonstrated they had no clue. And people then wonder subsequently why in a 20-year period we continued never to really gain what we thought was going to be a future nation of Afghanistan.
There's another issue there's a couple of issues here too, in regards to generals not knowing or whatever. And look, highest rank I achieved was captain. I mean, I wasn't staying in. I knew I was getting out the day I went in, and so I don't want to claim to understand their view. I do understand their desire to have metrics and measure things. Because you are managing a very, very large organization and you're managing a large operation. So I get that. And yes, there's going to be a disconnect between the guy on the ground, but that information's got to filter up. But here's the thing, though. When you go back and look at World War II, okay, and how we kind of dealt with a conquered enemy, first of all, our standard to stop the bombing. Okay, we literally were willing to bomb every single city until it didn't exist anymore in Germany and Japan. We were willing to destroy the entire country, which actually entails killing every man, woman, and child if necessary, until we achieved an unconditional surrender. So number one, we were willing to do what it took until the enemy cried uncle. Yeah. Okay? And then after that, after achieving that, we didn't then ask them and get all excited about elections and democracy and all that, as if this was a sign of our success. We said, no, you have no government right now. We will tell you what your government is. We're going to write your documents. You're going to model it after these things. Of course, we brought in institutions that they understood and had historical importance to them, like we allowed the Japanese to keep an emperor. The Germans already had a representative government. I mean, Hitler was only there 8 years. I mean, it really wasn't. Right. So they were able to kind of go back to the old system. But the point is that we didn't try to necessarily win hearts and minds, which is something that you heard a lot in the War on Terror. We told the Nazis, Nazism is outlawed. None of you are going to be in charge. We're trying people, we're convicting people, and the low-level people, if you don't want the same to happen to you, you're going to get in line. To the Japanese, we said, you can keep your emperor, but this military, basically military conquest culture of the military controlling the country and the politics, that's not going to be the case anymore. We're going to demilitarize you. You're going to have a defensive force only. And we really took a heavy hand at how they were going to redevelop their country. And then we poured in tons of money, tons of support, but there was no option as to whether or not you were going to do it our way. Conversely, we go to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I felt this in Iraq, very early on. We were constantly looking for these signs that they wanted us there and that we were saviors, and see, look, these people want democracy. Well, now human beings want to be free, and absolutely many Iraqis absolutely appreciated that we were there. I know in Iraq, there's not anybody in Iraq that wasn't somehow negatively impacted by Saddam, which is why they gave him up so quick. Okay, so there was an appreciation of what we could accomplish, but what we did was we actually pulled back the reins too quickly. as soon as they could have elections, we wanted to have an election. And then we're like, hey, this is their government. You guys are in charge now. Well, time out. The people that just got elected have never run a government, at a minimum in 35 years, since Saddam's been there. They don't know what they're doing. They've got people that now have power, but have never been in power. So they're going to just use it as an opportunity to enrich themselves. And I believe that I'm right in saying that it almost became policy to turn the other way and not pay attention to the corruption that occurred in both the Afghan and the Iraqi government.
Absolutely.
And by us allowing that to happen, because we thought that, well, that's their culture, it's just the way it is, we can't force our beliefs on them. Well, then what are you there for?
Right.
I mean, you conquered them, so if you're not willing to follow through, and let me say this one last thing. So then by us doing that, by us allowing their government and their military and civilian leadership to be corrupted by money and self-serving in the way that they did things, you did not gain the confidence of the soldiers willing to fight and of the people. Yeah. And so while I know the Iraqis, they trusted Americans because they knew that we didn't care about Sunni, Shia, or they knew that we weren't there religiously. We weren't. This wasn't a crusade. Like, they understood that we weren't trying to turn them into something that they're not. But they couldn't trust the government that we were leaving them with. Yeah. And therein lies the whole problem. And it was, I guess, even worse in Afghanistan.
So, but I'm going to tell you, there's something that you're kind of hovering around. And one of the reasons that was allowed to happen, okay, was we have the authorization for use of military force. These blanket documents that are coming out. So Congress has, the executive, the president, has the official constitutional right.
You mean instead of declaring war is what you're saying?
To go to war and to do military actions, okay?
Without declaring war.
Without declaring war. Now, at a certain point, because of Korea and other actions, Congress has said, okay, but you need to come back to us and get the authorization for use of military force. So that subsequently has led us into different operations around the world. Come up to modern days, okay, and these authorization for use of military forces is open-ended. So one of CVA's priorities is actually to eliminate the current authorization for use of military force and have it restructured, because we're not against the use of military force, have it restructured to where all AUMFs must have a time limit. Because the other side of that is the Congress, under the Constitution, is supposed to declare war.
Right.
But no matter what, they are the representatives of the people in a representative government and are supposed to be part of holding the executive accountable for that. And imagine if any of those AUMFs were only 2 years long, or maybe 3, and that in that 2-year period, the president and the generals had to come back and talk about strategies and plans, corruptions, and the next step forward. Yeah. And you had a representative body to tell them, this is unacceptable.
Right. Do you think, having been an elected official yourself, is the use of military force a way for politicians to avoid the actual vote of a declaration of war? Or I mean, you see
Absolutely.
What I'm saying? Is there a political benefit there? And if so, why the open-ended? I mean, why open-ended? Congress always controls the purse strings.
Yes.
And Vietnam was an authorization of force, right?
Okay. Forces.
And when people talk about winning every battle in Vietnam but losing the war and things like that, a lot of people forget that. The Vietnam War ended, quite frankly, because Democrats got elected in the election of 75 or 74, I think it was, or whatever, and they took over Congress, and they would not fund the war in Vietnam. And when they pulled the funding back, it was irrelevant what the president wanted to do.
Yeah.
or
Well, the
anything
AUMF
else.
was basically a way for the president
they-
to circumvent Congress.
Right, I was going to say, but Congress in Vietnam, they pulled the funding back, which is what caused the
So the AUMF was
collapse of Vietnam.
absolutely established to prevent the president from circumventing Congress.
Okay.
Okay? This was Congress putting their stamp of approval on military endeavors.
But when has Congress ever,
Okay.
in the last, since the War on Terror,
No.
Congress has never cut off they've never shut off the spigot, right?
Why? Because
how come?
So, well, why should you?
Now I'm asking, like during the Bush administration, when senators were getting up and saying the war is lost and all that, how come they weren't able to cut the funding? I'm just curious.
Well, first and foremost, because whenever, if you look at the War on Terror, okay, when we went into the War on Terror, everybody agreed it was the right thing to do.
Right.
Everybody.
Yep.
Still.
Hillary Clinton voted for it.
Still.
Ted Kennedy voted for it, right?
We truly believe
I think.
the effort to go after Al Qaeda
Yep.
and Osama bin Laden.
Yep.
Concerned Veterans for America agreed that was absolutely the right moves to do.
Right.
Okay. But fundamentally, what that led into was a structure. The AUMF is still open. They went into, I believe, 41 different countries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Under this
Yeah.
authorization for
Yeah.
use of military force.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, you think about it, we have over 800 bases, from radar sites to full-fledged military bases around the world.
All over.
We have 200,000 troops that are participating in some level in, it's reported, up to 170 nations out of 195. Okay? So these authorizations for use of military force, especially the 2001, has expanded the military around the world like we've never been. Right. None of our leaders have done this. And so the question is
well, it was in the time it didn't seem like it, but now in retrospect it was an overreaction to September 11th in the way that TSA was created.
Right. So how do you get retrospect? The changes in AUMFs that Concerned Veterans for America is supporting is A, timeline, B, geographic and mission specific, and third, a separate specific AUMF for any boots on the ground. Because each one of those would trigger Congress having to have the debate on moving forward on what's best for America's policy and use of the military. Because what we believe in realism and restraint is our foreign policy value. What we believe is the use of diplomacy and the use of the economic ability of America, both in providing funds and restraining funds, okay? These are things that should be constantly used. If you think, and we talked about this a little bit earlier.
But the Taliban doesn't care about any of that.
Well, they do, because America is funding Pakistan. Pakistan is funding the Taliban.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if we stop sending money
they're
to...
taking advantage of it.
If we
but
sta-
that doesn't change
If we
their-
didn't spend money in Pakistan,
Right.
would the Taliban had the additional money to do what it's been
that's,
capable of
well,
doing?
that's another issue, and I did want to mention that earlier. Is that I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this. I mean, we've got to have some guts when it comes to some of the policies and the way we deal with foreign nations. And here's why I think a lot of people liked Trump. A lot of people liked Trump because Trump was not a pushover. Trump was willing to go and face to face with friend or foe.
Right.
Right? He told Angela Merkel, you are not paying your fair share. NATO, he told all of NATO, you need to pay up. And guess what they ended up doing? They ended up paying up. He went to North Korea. People thought that was crazy. Trump's like, I'll talk to the guy and I'm going to tell him, this is the way it is. Okay. So here's the thing. We lead ourselves to believe, that we're going to work with Turkey, that we're going to work with Pakistan, that they're our allies. Hey, look, if you can get some Pakistanis if you can buy off some Pakistanis and get them to give you information as to where Osama bin Laden is, hey, that's great. We should be operating and have intelligence networks, human intelligence networks all over the place.
Right.
But let's never forget, these people, they do not share our interests. They're not our friends. They're not even our allies. Turkey shouldn't even be in it should even be with us in NATO. It's NATO, right? That Turkey's part of now,
I
or is it the? I'm trying to think. Turkey's in NATO, right?
I don't remember.
Our partnership with Turkey has not helped us out. Our partnership with Pakistan has been, I think, counterproductive. And we need to be honest with these people, and we need to tell these countries, if we catch you helping the Taliban, then there will be severe consequences. And that's what Trump would have said.
Yeah.
One other thing about the generals, because you mentioned
Yes.
the generals. A private that loses his weapon gets in more trouble than a general that loses a war.
Absolutely.
And we need to go back to where, it was kind of like when Lincoln during the Civil War was wanting results. He was having problems with generals being too defensive, not being enough on the offense. And he wanted to end the war as quickly as possible.
Right.
And he was willing to fire generals. Our modern day politicians, quite frankly, are scared of these guys. A lot of them are scared of them. I know Obama was. He was way in over his head, right? These are professional military officers. They do know what they're talking about, and you need to listen to them.
Sure.
But ultimately, you're the president. And if they're not getting the job done, you need to fire them.
Yeah.
And the last thing...
Well, to that note, I mean, Obama, because he, let's say, feared them or just respected them enough to at least take their word for what they were telling him, was responsible for the surge, which again proved no results. I mean, if anything, it actually set us back.
Well, but now remember, okay, but so here's what Obama did, though. Stanley McChrystal came in, and I think he asked for 60,000. Okay, now he's in charge of the effort in Afghanistan. If you don't believe him, then don't have him in charge, okay? Obama, I think, gave him 40,000. Why is that? On the basis of what knowledge did Obama decide, General McChrystal, I appreciate the recommendation, but I'm going to give you 40? Well, that's political. That's an insecure civilian who wants to show the military that I'm not going to be a rubber stamp. So he doesn't give them the forces that he needs. But the other thing I would like to see us bring back, and this would be very controversial and no one would go for it, from the last times when we were wildly successful in war, which was really World War II and which was World War II really, is the rotations that we do, I actually think are problematic. Now, as a guy who deployed for a year in the very beginning and did not get to go home on leave, okay?
Right.
Because we hadn't started that yet. And we did it by rank and it never made it to me. So I didn't get to go home on leave. I would hate to have spent 4 years in Iraq, okay? But if the war in Iraq had only lasted 4 years, that would have been more humanitarian for the Iraqis, and it would have been less costly and less painful for the United States, with less injuries, less killed, and less destruction to both of our economies. And so I would think that we should look at stopping this rotation because the generals get in there. They've only got 12 to 18 months. What do you expect them to do?
Yeah.
And it's a brain dump every 12 to 18 months.
This was 20 one-year wars in Afghanistan.
That's right.
And
right. And they know, and the Taliban's still there.
Oh yeah. Well, and what they say, you guys
they
have the
don't
watch, we have the time. But the reality, though, but this is more to the fact. If you look into the history of Jefferson and the Tripoli pirates, he went to Congress, and Congress agreed with his action of going to Tripoli to deal with them. And basically, they funded money to them, specifically to go do that battle. We need to have a Congress that is properly engaged because, again, they are the representatives of their people who are in the military, who are going to war and fighting these battles. But you see a disconnected Congress that is more worried about poking each other in the eye than they are worried about the fact that men and women are deployed all around. I mean, think right now in Iraq, we have 25 or so, you can never trust what the numbers are coming out of the military, 2,500 or so troops that are sitting over there being attacked by drones from Iran. To what benefit of our nation's forward movement. What is it that is our nation's benefit that is coming from that?
Well,
you
it's
have an
probably
Iraq
intelligence.
government.
Well, it's probably intelligence gathering.
Then
and
let's
things
use
like that.
intelligence.
Yeah, I'm just
let's
saying.
use the
you're
intelligence
asking
gathering.
What's the benefit?
Let's
It's
get the
probably that.
military out of there. Let's use the alternatives that we have, and you know well that there's a lot of counterintelligence alternatives to use. Okay, and let's admit it. The military should not be used. I mean, they are using the military as the hammer, as if everything around the world was a nail.
Well, I can tell you how to prevent us from ever having a 20-year war or a 10-year war, for that matter, maybe even 5. And that is require a declaration of war, number 1. Okay, so that brings in political will. Okay, make sure that the politicians are on board.
And liability.
Mm-hmm. Number 2, have a draft. Reinstate the draft. Because if you were reinstating the draft, it forces America to be involved in the conflict. It forces America to care.
Right.
Because every mother and father that has a 16, 17, 18-year-old, 20, 21, 22, something like that, they're all concerned now about this war and whether or not we should be in it or not. That's number 2. And number 3, you fight until you win and you don't go home until it's over. And you do that, and you will have things like World War II, where you had a massive nationwide effort to defeat an enemy, unconditional surrender, get it done, and get the hell out of it.
Because everyone had skin in the game.
Everybody had skin in the game, and everybody wants to go home. And the problem that we have today, and working for CBA and things like that, maybe Jimmie feels this, but there's only about, I'm trying to think of the number, there's about 500,000 on active duty in the Army, probably about 1 million reserve. When you add it to Marine Corps, like 250, something like that active. So when you add in all the reserve and active, I think we're looking at about 3, 4 million, 5 million total soldiers, airmen, Coast Guard, everything. Yeah. So let's say there's 3 to 5 million in the active and reserve, something like that. Well, there's 330 million people in the country now. So really what you're saying is you have 1, maybe 2% of the country that has true skin in the game that could potentially be deployed. Mm-hmm. That's number 1. And if you look at if you take their parents, okay, let's expand it to the parents because every parent loves the concern about their kid. Okay, so now you've got 10 million people. You've got 10 to 15 million people out of an entire nation of 320 million. So, you're not even at 5% yet of the country that's got real skin in the game for these wars. And that's how you have a popular initiative. That's how the country's all together. You get everybody together or we don't go at all. And so if people are together on the operation, okay, then you've got the country's support behind you. And it's not just this feel good, we support the troops. No, we're supporting the troops because we're all involved somehow. Yeah. Whether physically or emotionally. And then and that's how you also end up having shorter conflicts.
So Joe, I don't disagree with you, but I'll go back to the key philosophy is that realism and restraint. We are constantly seeing the military deployed around the world for various reasons. Okay?
Sure.
So from the time of World War II all the way through, from the Congo to Haiti to Grenada to Panama to all these different deployments around the world.
Right.
A good part of that tends to be where we're trying to impose our values, our beliefs. And if we have a philosophy of realism and restraint, okay, A, does this action benefit America? And that has to be the very first question. Whatever we're going to do with the military, how does that benefit? So before we even come to the point of declaring war on anybody for anything, how does that benefit America?
But see, by declaring war, declaring war is a almost like a moral statement.
No, I get it. You don't really win unless you declare war. Right. But again,
it commits you. It commits you because now you have to win or you've lost the war. We kind of I think as a country, I actually think the policymakers like the ability to send troops all around the world and do stuff, and I'm not suggesting we don't need to. But then I think actually our population kind of likes that. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. Military's out there doing their thing. God bless the troops, but as long as we don't really have to deal with it.
Yeah, we don't have to get our hands dirty.
And now we're watching TV, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, what's going on in Afghanistan?" Guys, we've been there 20 years.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's
Now
also
it's
the
important.
self-righteousness of saying that we are the world's police, as we used to say. That we are the peacekeepers or spreading democracy. I think, as Americans, especially those who aren't directly affected by it, like kind of wear that as a badge of honor. It's like, and that to them justifies our presence globally.
So you think about it. Go back to the 800 different military facilities around the world that the U.S. has, okay? The next closest, and this is a cumulative, is 30. So the Australians, the Brits, and others cumulatively have 30 around the world, okay? So that is us in a magnitude far above everybody telling the world that you should live an American way of life. That, and people are like, listen, this helps stabilize the world. Well, the reality is we spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan. We spent $2 trillion in Iraq. Are we any more popular in the Middle East now
Right.
than we've ever been? The answer is absolutely
I
not.
don't care. I don't care if we're popular. I take a.
But
a
it
little,
just shows that
yeah.
it's failed. It's
Well,
a failed policy, Joe.
but
they
what's
spent
popular,
that money. They sent the troops.
Well,
and
but that's
yet still,
Joe's
the
point.
Middle East hates us.
Joe's saying that.
But
that,
that's if we have an objective, if our objective as a country, okay, we'll go back to Iraq. I know it was ambiguous. People, by the way, I mean, there were chemical weapons there, but whatever. We didn't find the Scud missile that was aimed at Riyadh or something. But anyway, we decided to take out Saddam, right or wrong. Okay, we decided to do it. Okay, once that's your decision, you can't care what everybody. It's not a poll. We're not going to go into Iraq and then do a poll.
Right.
Okay. Actually, if we would have done a poll, you would show that they would be happy because about 80% of the country is not Sunni, so they would have been fine with that. But I mean, the point is that that's the mentality of, well, we've got to win their hearts and minds, and we want everybody to love. One of the biggest mistakes that we made was when we tried to convince our enemies to love us.
Yes.
They are not going to love us. They don't need to. We need them to respect us for what we're doing. We need them to leave us alone and understand that the consequences are severe. That's why we're here, okay? And also, we need to set an example. So we're a country that, for our own faults or whatever, the world looks up to us because we have rule of law and we have, by and large, social and economic freedom. So if you come to the United States, who your father is irrelevant.
Right.
And the country actually gets excited about people coming over whose father may have not been of any status in your former country, but now you've become very successful in America. We love that, and we support that. The rest of the world knows that, and that's why they want to be here.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you can't be here, what we'll do is we'll help you have a framework in your country where at least you have an opportunity to be free to your own success or failure. The Afghan women right now, they're in their home. They can't come out. They can't go outside.
Right.
They don't have any autonomy as a human being.
Right.
If that's not immoral and the world can't see that, then I don't know. Then I don't know what to tell you.
They're instantly in harm's way.
So no one can say that we're wrong.
So-
It's never not a good thing to pull someone out of that circumstance. Now, we can't be the world police.
Right, because what you have to realize is Mali right now is probably, because as demonstrated by the U.S. Department's report on terrorism, is the #1 terrorist nation.
Okay.
Okay. So you have a whole nother nation
Because
that is like that.
Because they have a failed government, and they're like, are
Then
they,
you
are they
have-
training Al Qaeda?
And then you
now or
have
something?
and then you
Okay.
have places that have things like Boko Haram and how they treat women.
Right,
So
right.
we can't use our military to go into every single country around the world
Right.
to free women. Okay?
True.
What we can do is support governments economically
Yep.
and diplomatically that are like-minded and strengthen them in those regions. And that's what we should be doing.
And that supports my other view on Iraq and Afghanistan, which is that counterinsurgency operations, all right, what we know as COIN, on large, massive scales, in my humble opinion, does not work.
Yeah.
Privates in the Army have a basic level of military knowledge. They're there to follow orders and fight countries' battles. Your E4s, okay, just above a private, those are guys that are kicking in doors, okay? Our military is simply not designed on a massive scale to conduct these embedded missions. Petraeus disagrees with me, I don't care. Iraq is not that great right now, okay, even though I supported the surge. The special operations community, that's what historically they have done. That is their mission. You have highly trained NCOs and officers that have gone through years of training just to get to that point. They all have language skills, communication skills, intelligence gathering skills, weapon skills, demolition. They all have, these 12-man teams all have lots of skills, operate at a high level in austere environments by themselves. They have the ability to go in and operate and partner with governments that are willing to defend themselves, right? Yeah. We can't do that with 500,000 troops. We can conquer a country with 500,000 troops, and we can occupy a country successfully with 500,000 troops, but that's not sustainable. And at some point in time, you have to shift the mission.
Yeah. So you're demonstrating realism, because the whole goal is to look at the world as a whole and realize where the appropriate use of military force is that will benefit America, okay? And if we want to see a stable Africa, as an example right now, Africa is the predominant continent where terrorism is growing, okay? And it's been there for decades. I mean, you think back into Somalia and what happened to Black Hawk Down, that was actually Muslim terrorist organizations that were working in that area that helped plan all these things out and to fight America. So the reality is, using the military in the appropriate areas in the appropriate amount is realistic.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and the restraint aspect is also what you demonstrated by sending out, you know, E1 through E4, Joe Snuffy, or, you know, whatever, whoever, in mechanized, light, whatever it is, into a combat zone to try to, you know, deal with things in a counterinsurgency way does not work. That is a mid-level, a mid-intensity conflict aspect. High intensity, mid-intensity, low intensity is more scripted towards the special operations and should be left to that. And also the fact that you demonstrated something that's really important for governments that want us there. We tend to force our way into governments and situations around the world that don't necessarily want us there. Mm-hmm. But also, think about this in realism and restraint. All right, so Jonathan has the might of the United States military behind him, okay? So Jonathan, at this point right now, no matter what you did in the world, around your neighborhood, to the countries surrounding you, you have the military might of the United States behind you. What is it more likely in the aspect that you might go poke your neighbors in the eye? Now, we are affecting foreign countries by having military there. You don't have to negotiate with your neighbors because we have your back. And we talk about, you know, the whole aspect of building countries. We go into these countries that we have these bases in, that if somebody was to attack them, right away the U.S. would defend them.
You're saying that the presence of the U.S. military perverts like foreign diplomacy amongst foreign nations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you think about that. So foreign nation diplomacy gets, like you said, perverted by artificially being backed. So think about this right now. We are in Germany right now to protect Germany against an attack by Russia.
Right.
As Germany is making economic deals to buy gas from Russia.
Yep, because we're being taken advantage of, which is something that guys like Trump wasn't letting happen.
So think about that.
And that's why they didn't like him.
If Germany is doing that, how many other countries that we have troops in do that same exact thing?
Sure.
Where is the realism and restraint in our foreign policy? Because right now we are seeing this happen in one of our largest allies.
Yeah.
Can you imagine in Africa where this is happening? Where we're putting money there?
The founders cautioned us. I mean, they cautioned. Thomas
Absolutely.
Jefferson cautioned us about foreign entanglements.
Washington did too.
I mean, they all cautioned against that.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Well, let me go ahead and reset the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for watching this special edition of the Yard Sign. We're talking about Afghanistan. Joining me today, our good friend and regular on the show, Joe Wicker, Army veteran and former state representative, former county commissioner in Citrus County, and now the coalition's director for Concerned Veterans of America, Jimmie T. Smith. And so we're obviously trying to tackle a big topic here. I did want to kind of bring the conversation back, being that Joe touched on the effect that a lot of people are voicing their sentiments on in regards to how the women are being affected. But I actually want to expand the conversation a little bit broader to again, an issue that many people are also very concerned about in all of this, which is not only the women and girls that are being affected by this, but the many consultants and translators and resource operators, if you want to call them, that are from Afghanistan that were helpful in our operations there. And, not even just the United States. I mean, there was a story today in one of the major media outlets talking about how, those that were supporting the British Army and their efforts, how the UK basically said, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you, as they were literally being escorted to the airport, and basically just left them there hanging high and dry. So, Joe, I know you've expressed, some sentiments, privately, about some of the people that you got to work with on the ground in Iraq, and Jimmie, from your experience and those that you've talked to, how does that also affect our veterans, and how does that also just affect the military as a whole in regards to what's being observed here globally, to how we're treating those that have helped us in this conflict for so long?
So Sam Rogers, who is one of our coalition's director out west, basically did an article on the USA Today. Great article, because he demonstrated that one of his interpreters actually saved his life. But he also demonstrated that leaving Afghanistan was the right answer. If you get a chance, please look it up. The name is Sam Rogers, USA Today. I think it was either yesterday or the day before. We should do all we can to demonstrate, if you're going to partner with America, we have your back.
Right.
We absolutely should. Now, again, we're going to go back and we're going to find where people, so it's really hard to go into a country, okay, to where this person has went home and there's no street address. It's that third house down from the mosque on the left. Okay, it's about the best directions you're going to get in Afghanistan. Okay.
I'll say in Iraq they have street addresses. It's pretty. It's interesting.
So when I talk to the Afghan veterans, they're telling me there's no such thing as address. There's a clump of houses.
Yeah, sure,
right?
sure.
So there's this presumption that we should know where everybody is to get them all out. Okay, it's much harder than people think it is.
Okay, so there's the logistical aspect of it.
I can tell you. So I was on a 12-man advisory team. We had 4 interpreters. So 2 Sunnis, a Shia, and a Lebanese Christian. Okay. I don't know if they were given to us in that way specifically, but it was smart. Okay. Just keep everybody honest, But we trusted our interpreters, I think, as much as you should trust someone who's not wearing the red, white, and blue. Okay, and they did carry weapons. Our interpreters had AK-47s, and they sat behind us in vehicles. So I mean, we did trust them. Many of them had served for years. Okay, and the deal for them was 5 years and you get a visa. We gave them fake names, right, for obvious reasons, and we did not, some of them we didn't know their real names. And I will tell you, I have no clue where they lived in town. So And part of that was just, I mean, kind of, they didn't need me to know, where they lived.
Sure.
And I think part of a lot of that also is just security, right?
Yeah.
If one of those people, if one of the interpreters got kidnapped, it was better for them to not know anything about the other interpreter, right? Just so that it's just for safety, right?
Sure.
Reasons, right? Need to know. So I couldn't tell you how to go get them. I mean, we had this one interpreter. I thought we called him Freddie. He was Shia. I had another one we called Knight. He was Sunni. I can't tell you where they lived. Now, one time I was on mission, and the Sunni actually told me. He said, "Yeah, I live around here. Like, I can tell you, like." Yeah. And so, I found out. I was like, "Oh, this is your hood. Okay, well then tell them, da 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 da." Like, But I mean, so no, there'd be no way that any of us, and we worked with them. So unless somebody at headquarters somehow had an address or knew, and I'm sure somebody does somewhere, because we had to vet them to a certain degree.
Right.
So I'm sure that through their background check, we've got some information. But I think in Iraq, that was easier to do. Like you said, in Afghanistan, with it being just so remote, it's probably a lot harder. And with the chaos that's going on, it's probably not easy. And of course, they got to get to you. But I consider it a total failure on the administration. Why you would not say to these interpreters, "Hey, listen, you need to be making your way to Kabul. Don't make a fuss about it,
Right.
but you need to start making your way to Kabul. I'm not saying we're leaving tomorrow, but we might be leaving tomorrow." Like, we should have given them plenty of heads up. Sure. And as far as from a veteran, almost I hate to say it, mental health, but the way veterans feel about it, I think many of them do kind of extend to the interpreter the ethos that we would have as a soldier, which is we're not leaving anybody behind.
Yeah. Well, and that's really what I was getting at, which is that relationship that's built, that trust that's built over time, because friendships, at least, to an extent, are.
I can tell you for a fact that when I was in Iraq, if one of our interpreters would have gotten captured and we would have had any intelligence whatsoever, I can promise you we would have been rolling. And we would have went in guns blazing to get that dude out.
Right.
They were that important to us.
Yeah.
And you got to give the interpreter credit. They don't have to do that.
Sure.
They don't have to do that. And in fact, you figure someone in the Middle East that speaks fluent English. Okay, this is an educated person. How do you get educated in the Middle East? Well, your parents are probably somehow connected, or you have money, or you're in the right clique of some kind. So right off the bat, they don't really have to do this, right? They're choosing to do this. Yes, they're being paid. Yes, they have an opportunity at a better life.
But they're still making a big sacrifice.
But they're still making a huge sacrifice, and they know that them and their entire family. So you can bet that the insurgent's not, the interpreter is not just the person you're dealing with. Their family's involved in that.
Yeah.
Well, but so imagine this. There's again, I'm going to go back to the AUMS, but so one of the things that is really important is, yes, this is definitely specifically affecting the mental health of certain veterans, okay? And, and sadly, and there's others that they never really connected with their interpreter and stuff like that because that wasn't their job and their mission. They were separate.
Sure.
But imagine, though, if the AUMFs were done in such a way that were time-limited, mission-specific, that congressmen and women would be involved to make sure they had the civilian oversight over the military prior to the close of these operations.
Yeah.
But there wasn't. There was a blanket check to go to war. And again, so the AUMFs, okay, and the whole declaration of wars, of course, obviously that's more of a discussion, but the AUMFs, if specific to the mission and specific to a time limit, would have said, okay, here's your time limit, and we're closing down this war. What is your plan? And they would have had to tell that plan to Congress. And they would have had to have it well-researched, well-funded, and proper. And I think this is one of the things you're going to find in the after actions. The lack of a proper AUMF has caused or been part of the reason that the entirety of the Afghan fiasco from start to finish, talk about the Afghan papers to now the closing of the war in Afghan, okay? I think you're going to find that the AUMF is part and parcel to the failure of American foreign policy.
Well, sure, because I mean, we saw basically what President Biden did was he started that ticking clock. He started that countdown clock, and whether they had a plan or not, which obviously we seem to see that there was very little and much of an actual plan to get out of there in a safe and timely manner, you know, has really kind of led to the problems we're seeing today.
I think you're going to see, right now you're seeing a bipartisan support for the changes in the AUMFs, for repealing AUMFs. There's actually Republicans who are far to the right, and there's liberal Democrats who are far to the left that uniformly agree that Congress needs to pull its power back from the executive branch.
Well, that goes back to, I think, the earlier part of the conversation where, again, our appetite in regards to this type of military conflict has changed dramatically, I think, overall as a nation. You know, and again, like we were brought into 9/11,
Yep.
you know, not, you know, by our choosing. And that's kind of what got us to where we are today, unfortunately, because again, a lot of decisions were made. And look, I mean, not to get off topic, but I think the reason there is such a large distrust in the government, and we're seeing it plainly here, is because we can't trust them. We couldn't trust these generals for the past 20 years to give us an accurate assessment of what was happening on the ground. And to what extent Congress knew that as well, I think is also worth looking into, because I'll tell you, from working in Senator Rubio's office, I sat down with a government contractor that provided services in Afghanistan to the helicopters. You know, they're talking about the Black Hawks, and there was these Russian helicopters that were primarily what was being used in Afghanistan. This company was responsible for the maintenance, the repair, and the training of Afghanis to fly them. And this was years ago, and they were saying, yeah, like, these people can barely read, much less fly a Black Hawk. Okay, you know, they're able to learn the Russian one, you know, because it's a little easier to fly, it's more mechanical. But the level of technology that these Black Hawks had was far beyond what the Afghanis were capable of understanding.
Right, right.
And so, you know, one of the things that I heard in preparing for this conversation today was in a conversation of kind of how we got here, was that we were trying to train their military the way we would train our military here, with a fraction of the resources and the education and the again, just some of the innate physical requirements.
But that just adds to what I was saying about when we start feeling good about them doing things, you know, for themselves.
Yeah.
In the very beginning and for the first 5 years, or maybe even 10 years, there should have been no discussions about them running anything.
Right.
You're going to go to school. We are going to teach you. There's not going to be any madrasas. There's not going to be any of that. And in America, we view it as an American value to allow people to, you know, practice their religions and things like that. And I'm not saying be anti-culture and anti-religion, but we're trying to get a job done.
Yeah.
And so you're going to need pilots in the future. To be able to secure your own country, you're going to need pilots. So guess what? We're going to go find the smartest 15-year-olds we can, you know, and we're going to start training them now.
Right.
And in about 4 years from now, they're going to be pilots, you know, and we just weren't willing to force on them certain things that needed to happen because that feels wrong to us. It feels anti-democratic. Mm-hmm. Well, what did you conquer a nation for then?
Right.
You conquered them so that you could turn around and give them the keys to the city? I mean, what we conquered was the Taliban.
Right.
But the Taliban was operating in essentially almost a non-existent, you could say it's a failed state, but it's almost a non-existent state. And so you can't conquer them and then expect everybody to take over. We did this in Iraq with the Shia.
Right.
The Shia in Iraq were, although they're the majority numerically, they were basically a political minority because Saddam was Sunni. Mm-hmm. And many of them were kept out of government. They were kept out of education. And so when they won the elections, overnight, it was obvious they were going to win. They're 60% of the country, and they're going to vote for their clan.
Right.
So overnight, the people who had never ran a country were now running a country.
Yeah.
That's malpractice on our part. We're the ones that gave them the opportunity to have the election in the first place. So we set them up for those conditions. We should have been able to think ahead and see that that wasn't going to work out.
Again, go back to mission specific. What was the mission going into Afghanistan? Was to get Al-Qaeda. So, and truthfully, I'll suggest that we didn't beat the Taliban. They faded back and waited us.
Yeah, they
reassessed.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
there's actually
retreated to Pakistan.
There's actually video
Yeah.
of them recording attacks on us as they continue to grow and get better and stronger and stuff like that. And in Iraq, and the same thing.
Of course.
They weren't stupid. They came in, they realized that they were having issues, and mind you, again, we got in the middle of a civil war and we chose a side. Okay? We got in the middle of the civil war and said, you know, we're going to take the northern whatever it was called, and we're going to fight the Taliban because the Taliban will not give us Al-Qaeda. At the point to where Osama bin Laden was captured, if we would have had a mission specific to A, devastate Al-Qaeda, and B, capture Osama bin Laden, capture or kill Osama bin Laden, if that would have been the mission, within months of us concluding that, we would have left that country. And that civil war would have continued, but it just did.
Right.
So we paused a civil war. We established through trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives a artificial government that was based on our philosophies and not theirs. And then we're surprised when it all falls down.
Well, unfortunately, there is a perverse financial incentive for wars to continue.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, you're going
Eisenhower's warning.
You're going to have a need for contractors and things like that. I'm not suggesting that it's wrong that someone has a company and they provide food for soldiers or do whatever they're doing, rebuilding. But the opportunity to make money in war can't be so perverse that people have a necessity to stay there. I mean, because if you think about it, if your job is to build buildings and the insurgency is destroying buildings that you're building, I mean, you make money by building buildings. So is a successful insurgency, as long as you're not getting killed? I mean, is it really counter to your business? It's not. It's financially lucrative. So I don't know how you take that out, but there just can't be there can't be more benefit to continuing the war than there is to ending the war.
Well,
and there's the big issue.
Well, you take it out by putting in timelines to where you only have this authorization for this force in this country for this time frame. Because at that point, Congress can look back at all the bills.
Well, and then they tell you a little bit longer, well, we're just about to turn the corner. I mean, how many times did a general say to Congress, well, we're making improvements, you know?
But at least,
yes, ma'am, no, ma'am.
At least there has to be a vote of the body that represents individuals back home. And then, because of that, the news cycles will generate the conversation that allows people like you and I to see what's going on and then fundamentally give input to our elected leaders. That's what missed out of this entire war.
But in addition to Joe's point about the military-industrial complex, right, which is what you were basically saying without saying it specifically, you know, there's also now these reports that, you know, this in many ways might have also been a huge money laundering, scheme among, multiple nations.
Lots of money lost.
Running money through Pakistan, running money through Afghanistan, exchanging for government contractors, warlords. I mean, the trillions of dollars that have run through this conflict. And so I think aside from the surface level beneficiaries, which, as Joe just mentioned, is our military industrial complex, which again is going to hit our economy incredibly hard, because now all of a sudden there's going to be a slowdown of need for those tanks and that type of equipment that's produced, in the Rust Belt and the Midwest, but also, those people who were nefarious in their reasons for wanting to prolong this conflict are going to find somewhere else to do it.
Yeah.
And where is that going to be? And that kind of leads me to what I wanted to close the conversation on, because this has been great, and I'm sure we could keep going for hours. But what is next? what does the continued fallout in Afghanistan look like, and where does our standing globally look like?
So here's the thing I'll suggest to you is people are being short in their theory that America is no longer a leader on the national stage or the global stage, okay? Because we lost in Vietnam and we recovered. By the 80s, we were again the world's leaders, okay? So within a short 5 to 6 year time frame, America was that. What I would suggest is from the Bay of Pigs to the Vietnam War to Somalia and other things that fundamentally people said, oh, America is no longer this.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. In Somalia, they came out and said, we are a paper tiger.
Right.
In Lebanon, when they bombed the Marines, and Reagan made the smart decision to, instead of continue to stay, which he swore he was going to stay, he subsequently changed his mind and brought the troops out. And people were like, oh, America's losing its strength and might. And then he subsequently used over-the-horizon capabilities. And remember when he bombed Gaddafi.
Right.
He didn't use troops on the ground.
Right.
And it raised our stakes again to international leadership by the American might that we had to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So in the short term, yes, we just got a huge black eye. But anybody who's ever got a black eye will know it will heal.
Right.
Well, in the Middle East, like I said in the beginning, they very much are eye for an eye, and you have to understand, you have to know yourself and know your enemy, right? You have to understand who you're dealing with. These people will drag you into, a conflict that you don't really want to be in, and where the outcomes are really not that beneficial for the country. Which is why when we've done limited actions with a clear objective and a clear end state, okay, which is kind of military jargon, but there's an end state. It's like, this occurs, it's over.
Right.
Right? When you've achieved that, we have good stories to tell. Desert Storm was one of those.
Right.
And the American population for many years said, oh, we never should have stopped. Well, George H.W. Bush, for whatever criticisms you want to give the guy, he also had to bail out of an aircraft over the Pacific Ocean. Okay, the dude understands, the horrors of warfare, and he had a clear objective in Desert Storm. We achieved that objective overwhelmingly, and then we said, okay, that's it, we're out. And you can argue that, well, there's these residual problems from that and blah, blah. Okay, well, there's always going to be trade-offs.
Right.
And there's always going to be trade-offs. And when we determined what that end state was, we maintained the initiative. We remain in charge. And from I guess just a perspective of our reputation, it helps us maintain our reputation. It's only when we depart from that.
Right.
That we get ourselves drug into these things, do we then not get to end things on our own terms? And I would argue that we're not really ending Afghanistan necessarily on our own terms, because I don't think this is what people expected it to go.
Not at all.
But what you're demonstrating was the years from Reagan through Bush of the Weinberger doctrine that fundamentally went away for the neocons and the war hawks of both sides.
Right.
That thought that the use of the military was the only answer to everything.
Yeah.
So the Weinberger doctrine basically went away when 9/11 happened, and we basically had the neocons and the far left with this philosophy of allowing us to spread the military larger around the world than we've ever been. But I think what you're going to see now, because of what's happening in Afghanistan, is the discussion of realism and restraint and how to bring our nation back to a foreign policy. Because if you think about it, if you ask anybody right now, what is our nation's foreign policy, I don't think anybody can actually describe it.
Right.
But realism and restraint is a foreign policy that, so Will Ruger, who was President Trump's nominee to be the ambassador to Afghanistan, okay, if you look on his Twitter feed, he articulates reason and restraint so very well. And you're finding more and more leaders around the world who are starting to listen to this, senators, congressmen and women, and things like this. And I think that, and CVA is supporting this, that this philosophy of foreign policy will put us in the correct position moving forward. Don't be afraid to use the military. Don't ever be afraid to use the military.
Sure.
But if you use the military for any reasons, it should have a benefit to the United States as a whole, okay? And if it is part of our overall foreign policy benefits, understandably. But then go back to also needing the changes of the AUMFs so that, we do over-the-horizon capabilities, that we engage the enemy no longer than a certain time frame, and that we have a specific mission. And last but not least, not only that, geographically, that we restrain ourselves so we're no longer going country to country to country to country with troops, and nobody in Congress is talking about it. And last is the aspect, if ever boots are put on the ground, it has to be a specific authorization for use of military force, because what was all this closing of Afghanistan about? The withdrawal, not of the Air Force, not in the Navy, the withdrawal of boots on the ground.
Right.
Boots on the ground are the one fundamental thing, because you're putting the lives of Americans in jeopardy.
Well, we have to, whenever you engage in military conflict, you have to want to win as bad, if not worse, than your enemy does. And in Afghanistan, and to a lesser degree, I guess, the insurgency in Iraq, like the Afghan insurgency, the Taliban, they didn't have to win; they just had to not lose.
Right.
And that's their backyard, right? And so you're already at an initial disadvantage, and we understand that, and we overcome a lot of that because of our, technological capabilities. But I'm gonna tell you what, people look at, I think of Joe Biden when he's talking about guns and gun owners, right? Saying, oh, how can you defeat the United States? What do you got? You got F-15s, you got nuclear bombs. And I think as a soldier, those things sound foolish to soldiers, or old soldiers, like myself and, like the former rep here, because what we know is that a small force, right, that's wearing nothing but a man dress and sandals and has an AK-47, who's committed to their cause, can wreak havoc on the greatest military force that's ever existed on this earth. As a soldier, I have to respect, you have to respect your enemy and their capabilities.
Sure.
And so when we don't want it as bad as they do, right off the bat, you're in trouble, because you've already mentally or psychologically, you've kind of decided that you're willing to lose. And at some point in time in Afghanistan, I don't know when, but at some point in time, we basically decided that we were okay with this not working out like we thought it would.
Sure.
And at the time that's where you get, okay, which sometimes perhaps, maybe the reality of your strategy isn't going to work, and you have to change strategies, or you have to decide that, you're going to do something completely different, which maybe leave altogether. But you can't tell me that we just figured that out. We figured that out a long time ago.
Sure.
And
yeah.
so if you're not willing to do as much as it takes to win as your enemy, then you should never fight that war. And I would submit to you that, again, the last time we did that was probably World War II, because we were willing to destroy every single building on our way to Berlin. The 8th Air Force will tell you that's what they did.
Right.
And we were willing to kill as many people as it took. And Americans don't like this. We can't stomach that. The idea that innocent people, women and children, would die at the hands of Americans or anyone in a war. But I hate to tell you, that is war.
Right.
So if you're not willing, and if you're not committed to do as much destruction as necessary to achieve victory, then you should never start and set foot in that country. Because if that's the way you are, if you're not dedicated like that, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
Joe, there's a lot of veterans who I've talked to, both from Iraq and Afghanistan, they have talked about how the women and children were pushed out in front of men with guns,
sure. Yeah.
and
Is there
why
a
we're
bunch-
not
is there a bunch
we're
of
not
little-
appreciative of what Curtis LeMay
bunch of
did
cowards.
in World War II. I mean, think about the things that people said about him. Matter of fact, Dr. Strangelove, I think, was about him. But the reality is,
You're talking about the commander of the 8th Air Force.
Commander of the 8th Air Force, who
in World War II.
who went
That
in
was-
and bombed the parts factories that were in the middle of cities,
Yeah.
Right.
and knew that there was going to be casualties.
We knew there would be casualties. Yep.
But the reality is this: that discussion needs to happen in Congress, and it doesn't.
Well, it's cultural.
Congress-
It's cultural too, though. We have an obsession. And I saw it in the military. Again, sorry to interrupt. This goes
No.
back to.
But mind
this goes
you,
back
I
to
grew up-
loving. This
I
goes
grew
back
up-
to hearts and minds.
I grew up old Army. So when I first joined in the infantry, my veterans who taught me how to fight were Vietnam veterans.
Okay.
And the technique was spray and pray.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Right. Yeah. And we definitely don't believe in that now. We have an obsession with precision and limiting collateral damage. And if you're not willing to have collateral damage, then you shouldn't be going to war.
Well, I'll give you this.
Because war itself creates collateral damage.
One of the worst things is that somehow America thinks that every strategy, such as the withdrawal,
Yeah.
should be announced and broadcast on the TV. I mean, think about going
Yeah.
into Somalia.
Yeah.
They landed on the beach and the TV was there recording it.
Yeah.
Okay? The reality is war should be,
Yeah.
to some extent, outside of the norm of what we as the American society see, because it is a nasty thing.
It is, and our enemies love our rules of engagement. I mean, the idea that, consider this for a second. At one point in time in Afghanistan, the rules of engagement under Obama were that soldiers had to be getting actively engaged before they could engage back. Do we realize that police officers in the United States aren't even under that strict of rules of engagement?
right.
If you even look like you're going to pull out a gun on a cop, they will shoot you dead and be let off scot-free for doing it. And we got soldiers in Afghanistan who couldn't shoot at anybody, couldn't call in artillery, couldn't call in airstrikes,
Right.
unless we basically went and did a survey to find out, whose house was going to be damaged, whose property was going to be damaged. Is there anybody in the vicinity that's not 100% guilty? This is not a court of law.
Well, even more recently,
You know.
I mean, while Donald Trump's peace agreement with the Taliban saved American lives, right? I mean, that's undisputable.
Sure.
Right? But
I
it
was
didn't
shocked
save.
to learn we hadn't had a casualty in 18 months.
Right.
I couldn't believe that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Because of the Doha Agreement, absolutely.
But it didn't save Afghani lives.
Right.
It didn't stop the Taliban from
Right.
continuing to
Right. Yes.
increase their presence
Yeah.
throughout
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Really kind of laid the groundwork for this withdrawal to happen the way that it did.
They just had to not touch us.
Sure, exactly. And so whether that was through some people are saying agreements that they had with different factions of the military throughout Afghanistan, for there not to be any kind of conflict, or whether it was again taking lives that were Afghani and others.
Pompeo was very
not,
clear about
and
that.
not American.
Well,
yeah.
people are trying to pin this on Trump, and here's what I want to say about those that say, well, because the Democrats are already doing this. They're saying,
Yeah.
oh, well, all Biden's doing is executing Trump's plan. So if it's going bad, you got to look at Trump. Well, hold on a second. Time out. When Biden came into office, one of the first thing that guy did was go on a spree of executive orders, right?
Right.
Overturning previous executive orders of the Trump administration. They began passing legislation, which is legislation that in no way would look like legislation that Trump would have passed. They started making nominations for the federal government, for the different bureaus that are in no way, they're the exact opposite type of people that Trump would have nominated. So before you start buying into this idea that, oh, Biden's just executing the Trump strategy, hold on a second. President Biden can do and overturn any federal mandate, strategy. He can do executive orders. He's in control of the military. He is the commander-in-chief.
Right.
So there's only one commander, and that happens to be Joe Biden,
Yep.
president. So it doesn't matter what Trump said or did. You are the commander of the military. President Biden is completely responsible for whatever actions are being taken now by the military. You can't change everything Trump did over here
Except that one little thing.
and then say, "Oh, my hands are tied. I can't do anything about what Trump."
Yeah.
Actually, the United States military is the one thing
Right.
that you can do just about anything you want to do.
Or
'cause you're
say,
the commander.
or say that, oh, I wanted to do undo everything
Oh,
Trump did except
yeah.
that.
Yes.
That's the one
so
thing.
Which,
I
so
just,
which
I just
is
left
it?
that alone.
You undid all this other stuff,
Right.
but you didn't undo Trump's deal in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Or is it that you can undo things that Trump did, and you have been, and you are the commander-in-chief, but you just don't want to take responsibility for it?
Right.
And I think it's the latter.
All right. Well, on that note, again, thank you to everybody for watching this special edition of the Yard Sign, and a huge thank you again to my guests over here, Joe Wicker, Jimmie T. Smith. Definitely won't be the last time we have you on the show. We appreciate you stopping by, and appreciate all the work you're doing for our veterans, for our nation, to continue to serve, our country and our community. So we appreciate you for being here today.
Thanks for coming.
On behalf of Joe Wicker and Jimmie, I want to thank you so much for watching. You will be able to find the audio version of this program on our audio platforms over at the Tech Overlords at Google, Apple, Spotify, Audible, Amazon, and iHeartRadio. All right, so this will be available whenever, wherever you'd like to find it. Love to hear your feedback on this. Make sure you find this, like us, follow us, and share tonight's show on all of your social media platforms, and we'd love to hear your feedback on it as well. Again, on behalf of Joe, Jimmie, I'm Johnny Torres, your host. Thank you so much for watching The Yard Sign. Good night, everybody.